As Russia cuts itself off from the West, whose side is China on? In February, a document was signed which made for uncomfortable reading in the West. The agreement signalled a deep alliance between the nations of two global superpowers, China and Russia. China's President Xi Jinping and Russia's President Vladimir Putin said their relationship knew no limits as a reaction to what they characterised as NATO expansion plans and growing Western allegiances. They promised to work together on AI, climate change, space and control of the internet. It came after many years of a complicated and at times uncomfortable relationship between China and in particular the US.
Xi Jinping doesn't have a democratic with a small d bone in his body, but he's a smart guy.
And it signalled something that is now proving useful to Russia, a relationship in which nothing was forbidden.
China's actually quite supportive of Russia. They're not allies, but they do have aligned interests because the Chinese and the Russians, they see the West both as a problem. They both see the West as something they don't really like. They don't like the way the rules of the world work. They'd like to change them. On the other hand, China is immensely stronger than Russia. So it's not an equal relationship. President Putin wishes it was. He tries to pretend that he's an equal with President Xi Jinping, but he isn't.
Western intelligence suggests that China knew about Russia's plans to invade Ukraine and had asked them to delay until the end of the Winter Olympics in Beijing, where Vladimir Putin was invited as a guest of honor. It's a claim that China denies.
时报的报道纯属虚假信息。这种转移视线、甩锅推责的言论十分卑劣。乌克兰问题演变到今天的这种局面，来龙去脉是很清楚的，究竟症结何在，大家心知肚明。
As Russian troops made their way into Ukraine, China appeared to take the diplomatic route.
中方对此高度关注，局势发展到这一步，是中方不愿看到的。 也不符合任何一方的利益。
But as the West hit Russia with sanctions and penalties, China's support gave Putin a lifeline.
但我相信中国一定会通过间接的方式，为了帮助战略伙伴改善经济金融处境，会以间接的方式，来至少客观上 undermine。 这个西方对俄罗斯的中国不赞成的制裁。
It is possible that the Chinese would help the Russians out with a payment system. Now the Russians have been thrown out of the world financial institutions. The Chinese could compensate for that to some degree. They could take more Russian energy, which they would quite like to do if the Russians can't sell it to the West because of really tough sanctions. And they certainly defend them just about in the United Nations and in other world forums.
So with President Xi Jinping effectively propping up Russia's economy by refusing to place sanctions against them, attentions turn to what's in it for China. Make no mistake, China is waiting and watching to see how this plays out. The war in Ukraine could act as an example for China if it decided to invade Taiwan. Beijing sees Taiwan in a similar way to how Russia sees Ukraine, an unresolved historical question whose future it is theirs alone to decide. While there's no suggestion yet that the country is planning an imminent invasion, we do know that Taiwan is seen by China as a breakaway province that will one day reunite with the mainland.
最根本的不同在于，台湾是中国领土不可分割的一部分，台湾问题完全是中国的内政，而乌克兰问题呢，则是俄罗斯和乌克兰两个国家之间的争端。
Let me say this from the bottom of my heart. You have been an inspiration to the Taiwanese people in facing threat and coercion from authoritarian power.
But it's worth remembering that these two countries are very different. Taiwan has a much bigger economy than Ukraine and is much further away geographically than Ukraine is from Russia. Any invasion would be much more difficult to execute.
The thing about the Ukraine crisis, which is so important, is that the Russians are being pushed back, not just by the Ukrainians, but by world opinion. And world opinion is so hostile to Russia, and Russia's become such a pariah, that in a way, it's made Taiwan a bit safer. Because Xi Jinping has realized, or will realize, that the effect of this crisis has been to strengthen the West.
That said, the world is now sitting up and paying attention. The US has become one of the main providers of arms and support to Taiwan. And in response to what they perceive as an increased threat from China, a delegation of US former intelligence and military service officials has been sent over to the island.
对台承诺坚若磐石这样的一个具体行动，那同时当然是展现了台湾议题在美国享有一个跨党派的一个高度的共识。
China could well be taking comfort from the fact that the West has ruled out sending troops to Ukraine. And while the impact of sanctions against Russia is being felt in the West, the pain of sanctions against China would be much more severe. For now, the world waits as events play out in Ukraine. But the importance of the Western response cannot be underestimated and will have ramifications across the globe.